Okay, we are starting up here. I'm going to give this a minute for everybody to actually get into the room. So for those of you that are here already, hello and welcome. I know that we have a lot of people that are going to be coming on today, so we are just going to give ourselves a second to let everybody get queued up before we jump into any of the live content. I am thrilled that you're all here today. So for those of you that are in, feel free to, if you'd like, jump into the chat and say hello. Awesome. Okay, Megan's telling me that all of our tech is working well. All right, so attendees are, hello, Rundy, how are you? It's so nice to be able to actually like talk to people and not just have to text back. So everyone, hello. Thank you all for joining us today. I am thrilled to be here with Krista Fazio. Chris, I'm going to mess your title up, Krista. So I'm going to let you do. Krista is in charge of communications for Unionville School District, I think. We had the pleasure of getting to work with Krista on a logo / mascot transition for the school district. And the reason I thought it'd be so great to bring Krista on, like there's people here from all over the place. Some of you are from schools, some of you are from universities, but there's an awful lot of you from all different types of nonprofits that like you're never going to create like a bear mascot. And that's totally okay, because even though creating a character type mascot was like the end game of Krista's project, the reason I thought she'd be so valuable for you all to hear from is that she did the most incredible job with culture. She did an amazing job of taking a community of people that are strong stakeholders that really care about something and help them, moving them along to not just accept change, but to embrace change. And like, I'm sure all of you know, that is not an easy thing. When you run an organization, people get really attached to the way things are. And so making any kind of change can often be really difficult, much less a change that involves young people and their parents, shall we say. So Krista, welcome. Thank you so much for being on with us today. Why don't you share with everyone a little bit about your background and like what was going on at the school district that made you think about this?
Sure. All right. Thanks, Beth, and welcome everyone. I am so honored to be here speaking with you all today. As Beth mentioned, I am the Director of Communications and Community Relations for Unionville Chadds School District. We are a small suburban school district outside of Philadelphia. We have 4,000 students, about 800 staff members. We have 6 schools, and our district spans 72 square miles. We're located in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, in Chadds, Pennsylvania, and parts of Westchester, Pennsylvania. Again, I'm so grateful to be here to help tell the story of how we went on this journey of rebranding our high school. And this was just for our high school, Unionville High School. And really, it was such an enlightening experience, and it was a quick experience, which I think Beth alluded to in her promotional materials. It was quite fast.
Yes, very fast.
So, you know, the conversation about the use and appropriateness of the mascot has been alive in our district for a really long time. The Unionville class of 1955 is on record as the first to use the American Indian mascot, including the iconography and caricatures as part of their mascot. And over the years, the high school, it has been really common to continue the use of various versions of the American Indian imagery, costumes and songs and cheers. But these practices were discontinued at Unionville High School a few years ago. And in 2015, we adopted a new logo. It's the farthest bottom right. And at this point, we really considered the Indian as our nickname, but we really didn't have a mascot. So formally in 2017, a Unionville student organization known as Students of Color raised the issue on the mascot. And then subsequently, a group of students known as the Identity Council continued the conversation. They worked with consultants from our county intermediate unit, University of Penn, to assist them in engaging with our community on this challenging conversation. And this work really produced a lot of valuable feedback and healthy discussion, but the administration did not consider retiring the mascot at that time. But based on this feedback that we've collected over the years, the ongoing conversation, the formal feedback from 2017 and 2018, and the feedback from summer of 2020, along with a call to action that was related to the focus on human rights and social justice at that time, as we all know, in the summer of 2020. It was really clear that there were students and staff members and alumni who really wanted to see that change happen now. And then we also knew that there was a group of folks who would clearly oppose the change, and how would we navigate that? But most importantly, there was a voice in this matter that we really needed to listen to. We needed to engage with the people from the Indigenous racial group, not only in our community, but all around. And while there's no shortage of information on the internet to condemn the use of Native mascots, there's really no replacement for real and rich conversations to gain that true understanding of one's perspective. You know, people in our community would argue that we're honoring the Lenape tribe by using the Indian as our mascot. And we never really felt qualified to speak on behalf of the Indigenous people. So a colleague of mine, Pat Crater, he is our Director of Student Activities, and our Superintendent, Dr. John Danville, sees the opportunity to speak with Chief Coker from the Lenape Indian tribe of Delaware to just ask, you know, and what we heard from their conversations, we heard was that they, you know, the depiction of the mascot, the Indian mascot of that male warrior on horseback wearing a feathered headdress was really not the correct depiction of the Lenape Indian tribe. It's really a small drop in the bucket compared to the amazing diversity held within each band, tribe, and nation. Lenape actually means the people. They were peacemakers and wisdom keepers. And they made baskets and pottery and lived in bark houses. So they're not, he shared with us that they're not to be considered as relics or figments of history for Halloween costumes, and they are people with a rich culture, which should be honored and respected. So that conversation really led to, you know, some really great content from the tribe itself that really was important in all of our conversations with the community moving forward. And that was that they are not mascots. They do not want to be considered mascots. So it's really kind of just the history.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I love that it's so common for those of us that are thinking about a change to just kind of look internally, like, what do we want? What's right for our organization, you know, and especially when it comes to things that people are attached to, you know, the voice of people that love something and don't want it to change can often like overwhelm that story. And so I love that, you know, you were able to compensate for probably the strength of opinion with some facts, with some actual like current perspective. And that, I mean, not everybody has that specific situation, but I feel like there's always room to say, okay, I know that this is what you think and you feel. Where do we need to look to get divergent perspectives? And then how do we take all of those perspectives and put them together to figure out where do we need to be today? Because I mean, it's really about like, how do you want to be identified moving into the future? Because you can't change the past, but is this the past that you want to build your future upon? And I think every organization, you know, can look inside themselves and really think about that, whether it is, you know, it's rising its head so much in schools and in sports situations because of so much adoption of native iconography. But one of the things I thought was interesting about it, like once you like took that, you put your toe into the water around whether this is culturally and racially appropriate, you guys went even further and said, what about gender? And so I love like how you just really said, let's explore every boundary of what makes us who we are and what's going to make us feel proud to move into our future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're hinting a little bit at our guiding principles, Beth. Just to jump ahead a little bit, once the we actually engaged with the community in several, we call them community conversations, to get their perspective. And we heard a lot of stories about, former students and alumni digging up arrowheads, over the summer, and on the farms that, span our district, and families wearing the same sports uniform each year. And, we wanted to make it clear we weren't negating the history of and what they had experienced. It was just a time for a change. It was time to do something important. And we wanted to make that clear. And we also made a commitment to new ways that we would honor the Lenape tribe as well, because, with the retirement of any, important mascot or, logo, we should try to honor the history in new ways that are appropriate. So we did make that commitment. We're planting some native gardens on our campuses with the help of Longwood Gardens. We're incorporating aspects of Lenape history into our curriculum. So just wanted to share that too. But then the community spoke. We shared what Chief Coker had shared with us, that, from the tribe itself, they do not want to be a mascot. And in those conversations, there was one thing that even the folks who opposed the change, there was one thing we could agree on, and that was that the voice of the Lenape tribe mattered. So really, it just made sense. And in August of 2020, we officially retired the mascot, and then that's when the real work began, and what Beth was kind of getting at. And honestly, it was so tempting to just jump into a conversation about what could our new mascot be, right? Everyone was really eager to start envisioning what it could be, but we had some really important work to do first, and that was to, as a committee, create these guiding principles. And these guiding principles would really guide our work as a committee. And just to give you a little background, the committee was made up of 40 individuals. They included administrators and teachers from the school district, but the largest contingency was students. So with 40 members, we had about 20 of those members were students from our high school. We actually had 2 members from our middle school as well.
Was that a conscious decision, Krista, to split it kind of evenly?
Yeah, we were looking forward. We were always looking ahead. And one of the things that we knew is we wanted this to be a legacy that these students would be leaving, and not just the students on the committee, because we'll talk a little bit about how we determined who our final mascot. And I'll just let you know, it was through a student vote. It was a legacy of this current student body who really, I shared with you all the history of in 2017, 2018, how people wanted to see this change then, but nothing happened. It really was the current students and the current events of our nation that really reignited this process. So we wanted them to really have a strong kind of ownership to this decision, and as it would be almost their legacy as they moved on. Especially to our seniors, they'd be making a decision that was so important to them that they really wouldn't be able to experience too much.
Right.
They had been their whole entire high school career, they haven't had a mascot to rally behind. They haven't had those cheers at football games that they can, associate with their mascot. We've heard over and over again that they felt like they didn't have an identity. They really couldn't celebrate being the Indians. They didn't feel right. So these guiding principles were more important than ever, because they really wanted to make sure whatever we were selecting, was going to meet these standards. We didn't want to run into any issues down the road. So these guiding principles were built with that in mind. And, guiding principle 1 kind of speaks to what you just mentioned about the gender neutral. Number 1, represent an entire student body while embodying the positive traits and qualities of our students. And there was a really neat discussion about, or interesting discussion about horses when we came to going through all of the submissions for the mascot. And we are a very big equine community here in Kennett Square, we have the New Bolton, the UPenn New Bolton Center, which is a large veterinarian clinic out here. It's where they treated Barbaro, the famous racehorse. At the beginning of this process, I would have bet $1 million that we would have had a horse as our mascot. And the interesting thing is that in the conversations, when we were going through the submissions, the students actually kept going back to these guiding principles. And when you look at the options of a horse mascot, you have colt, stallion, Mustang, thoroughbred. I'm trying to think if there were any others that came up, but really
Bronco.
Yeah. Colt and Mustang are male horses, and stallions are from the western part of our country, and they don't wear horseshoes. And Beth knows the horseshoe for Unionville was a big part of what we wanted to be able to use if we were going with a horse. So going again with guiding principle number 5 translates into an identifiable brand. So these guiding principles were truly important, and we struggled to find a horse mascot that we wanted to put forward to the student body that we felt met all of these guiding principles, and we didn't waver. If they didn't check off each one of these, we did not put it forward, and we did come up with one in the end that went forward, but yeah, so that was an interesting experience.
And it's so interesting. And I have to say, I really love this idea. Like, this is such a great thing to share with people today is, before you jump into, whatever it is, whether you're a school or a nonprofit, like whether you want, a swirling globe or you want, a bear, it doesn't matter what the iconography is, but to pause before you think about the picture and think about like your why. Like this is really sort of like your branding, like why are you doing this? Like whatever you choose, what's the measure that it has to meet in order for everyone to feel like the process that you're putting yourself through is worth it and that you've achieved success? I mean, it's so important. And not to mention for the school, but like what a great experience for students to kind of go through this process of doing something meaningful. And while they didn't get it for their school, to really get that feeling of leaving with a legacy. One of the things that we say all the time when you're doing a branding, rebranding, or what we like to call a brand focus, because I don't like rebranding because it's like you're taking away something, whereas brand focusing is about taking what's wonderful and channeling it. But if the leaders are not invested and not involved, then the whole thing is going to fall apart. But the thing I always tell people is the people you think are the leaders may not be the leaders. Like, you really need to look in your organization and figure out who are the people that need to be like invested in this change and excited about this transition. It may be the people that have titles that make it look like they're at the top, but it may be somewhere totally different.
Yeah, we our best brand, we knew our best brand ambassadors were going to be our students, and that strong contingency on the committee, they had a huge role in the entire process and the reveal. We actually gave them ownership of the entire reveal and gave them so much credit for the work, and I think that really excited them. It gave them some street cred, like they have gone through this process, and they were able to go talk to their friends and say like, no, this is why these 2 options are the best options. We've gone through this, and they're really exciting. So when it came time to vote, it was an exciting time, as opposed to people kind of griping about what the options were.
Right. And I also just want to pop in here to tell everyone, I've got a whole bunch of questions for Krista, and we're going to keep going. But if you have questions along the way, if there's things that you want Krista to dig deeper into, or you have a specific situation that maybe she could weigh in on, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A or into the chat. We're happy to, intersperse questions into the whole conversation that we're having here today. So Krista, going through something like this is no small undertaking. As you were getting started, what were the things that you were maybe worried about or thought might be challenges that you knew were going to be, "Wow, we've got to solve this." Um, and the things that you knew might like are the make or break moments for this working for your community.
Yeah, I know that the biggest challenge that we knew we were going to have was, we knew we never were going to convince a certain part of our community that this was the right thing to do. There was, like I said before, there was a lot of history, a lot of memories, and there was some feelings that they felt that we were honoring the Lenape tribe, and they didn't understand why we needed to do this. So I think our biggest challenge was going to always be making this something that a community could accept and then also buy into. So, we had to look at our timeline and identify when did we want to engage the community, because we always knew we wanted to engage the community, because in order for this to be something that we would maybe change some people's minds or get them to accept, they needed to be part of the process. So, and who would make the final decision? So looking at that timeline, we knew we wanted to engage with the community right off from the beginning with a survey where we asked for, okay, tell us what you think our mascot should be. Everyone can have an opinion if, on what maybe, even if you think it should still be the Indian, well, it's not going to be. So what do you think it should be? And the great thing is we learned so much about our community and the history because we required folks to include a rationale. And it was really great. We received over 500 entries.
You received over 500 entries of people saying, this is what I want, and also this is why. That's incredible.
Yeah, and some were, and there is jokes and things like that, but not
like you got some Bodie McBoat faces.
Yeah, right, exactly. But so we really put it out there for the community. Now's your chance, and then it was going to be, okay, well, how do we narrow this down? And what we wanted to do is really believe in our committee. We had built a committee of 40 members.
Wait, Krista, talk a little bit about, so you had students, high school age students. You had obviously, so you had some teachers and you had some administration. Were there other people, like you keep talking about the community? Is that I can't remember, is that the whole range of the community, or did you bring in other representatives?
We did bring in members from the community to sit on the committee. So we had community representation, alumni representation. We had parents of elementary schools who had, no work connection to the district, just parents. And then some parents too of secondary students. So it was really interesting. We included, one of our members was a large mammal veterinarian because we really thought she would bring something to the table. Another was a historian who was really well versed in the history of the Brandywine. There's a real rich history here. And so we really carefully constructed our committee, and again, with students being the focus, but we didn't overload it with our own staff. One of the members of our community, he's actually retiring this year, sad, but he was a student through Unionville all his life, and he is our head custodian at the high school. And having someone on our committee like that, who he was an Indian, a Unionville High School Indian, and now he's a member of our community to shepherd this change. Things like that was, it was really important to have those members on our committee too, and get them to be those brand ambassadors out there.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So how did you communicate? This is another huge thing that I feel like comes up when you ask a lot of people for their opinion. There's sometimes sometimes probably always the expectation that if you're going to ask me, you're going to do what I tell you to do. So how did you communicate to people you're on this working group or you're part of this discussion group, like what their role was going to be? Like, did you do anything so that people understood, like, this is the limits of your power?
Well, I mean, the guiding principles really helped us with that
Mhm.
too, right? Whenever there was a moment of, disagreement, we could always kind of go back to the guiding principles and make sure we were living up to like what we signed up for,
I love that. That sort of makes it like a third party, just decider. It wasn't like, well, it's not like we don't like what you said, but
Mhm.
the guiding principles,
Right.
which I bet, I mean, it's tremendously helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we honored the community's
Mhm.
input, and then I think we just had a discussion with the committee, and we said like, we trust this committee to take it to the next step. We knew this. We had the student vote at the end, and we had the committee submission, and really we created this committee how we created it to be able to kind of make some of those hard decisions in the middle.
Mhm.
So we had one meeting, and it was interesting. We met every Wednesday night. So from the from the time we retired the mascot in August to the time we decided on the mascot, which was middle of December, um,
Mhm.
we met every Wednesday night. In fact, one of our meetings, Wednesday starting at 4 p.m. when after sports, one of our meetings was 5 hours long, and that included the great debate of the horses. But people were so committed to this decision. The weight of this decision kind of brought the committee together. There weren't many arguments or disagreements because we felt like we were doing something so important, that we could always come together back on that kind of principle.
Okay, so let's shift the discussion forward. So we got these committees, they got involved, they weighed in, they narrowed down, and they got it down to two choices.
Mhm.
It came down to the Stampede, which was your version of a horse that
Mhm.
didn't have gender or any, and Longhorns. And so these were two really different styles, ideas. You did some really interesting things, I think, to help your community embody what life would be like if they made one decision or the other. And I think, it's so rare that anybody gets to sort of like live a day in the life as if you'd made a decision. You kind of have to be like, well, I'm either going to marry that person or I'm not going to marry that person. You don't get to test drive and then walk away, for the most part, or maybe, I don't know, how do I know if I want to have a baby? Like most decisions you kind of have to, but you did some really cool things. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different things that you did to help the community imagine what the impact of a decision one direction or another would be?
Yeah, thanks. So the Stampede was our way of honoring the equine community. The mascot itself would have been a thoroughbred horse. Um, and so there was a little bit of an education with the Longhorns. So that was needed around Longhorns. So everyone was familiar with our equine community, but Longhorns in southeastern Pennsylvania, why is that a good fit, right? What are
That's what
we,
I
Texas?
thought when you first
Texas,
told
yeah.
me.
But interestingly, there's a farm here called the Buck and Doe Run Farm along Route 82, and uh, back in geez, I want to say the 60s, the King Ranch of Texas actually bought some land up here to ship some cattle to they were experiencing a drought. And from there came this sub ranch, satellite ranch of King Ranch, and there were tons of longhorn here in this area, and there's still longhorn in this area that we can see today. So it kind of stuck, but there was that education piece. So we really, again, engaging with the students, giving them, empowering them to kind of, share the story and share all this information. We utilized our speech and debate team, and they put together a virtual assembly where two students debated each option and gave some examples of how we could use or how each would translate into some identifiable iconography.
And you recorded them and broadcast it.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Mhm.
shared it as it was an assembly that was shared in our high school. We shared it with our community. So not only were they seeing, our students being excited about this, they were also learning, about why each option
Mhm.
kind of fits. But you had mentioned too, just seeing how we would actually live each mascot. We had the cheer team. They were amazing, and they created cheers as if we were the Longhorns and as if we were the Stampede that were also part of that video. So just really kind trying to create this image and this these the possibility of either one, and getting people to buy in, so that when it did come down to the vote, you're never going to please 100%, but they had more information going into that vote.
And they did, and when it came down to the vote, it was pretty significant, right? From what I remember.
Yeah, I think it was like a 65-35.
That's what I thought. It was 65
yeah.
or 70. Yeah. So it was clear, like, and I
yeah.
think a lot of the work that you did leading up to it to really get people in understanding the ideas and familiar and involved really helped people actually have a thoughtful opinion, shall we say, rather than a knee-jerk reaction. So we move things forward. And so this is about the, like, right around the time that they were planning the debates and the cheers is when Krista brought us in. So she and her team did all of this background, incredible work. And then it came time to say, all right, we're getting ready to make a decision on how we're going to visualize this idea. We need some help. And so we then picked up and took them through what we would call our creative brief process. Not unlike Krista's guiding principles, a creative brief takes in information about what you care about visually. How do you represent yourself and what words mean? One of the biggest problems that we see all the time is somebody will say something to us like, we want it to be a modern design. Well, do you mean like mid-century modern? Do you mean like outer space modern? Like, what do you mean by that? And so one of the things I've learned as an art director and creative director over the years is that you really have to dig into what people mean by what they say, and especially dealing with teenagers who had never been through a process like this before and weren't used to being necessarily particularly thoughtful of their words. And there was a wide range of things that people liked and wanted. And it takes some rounds. The first round that we did got us a phone call the next morning from Krista going, upon further consideration, I'm sure you had your moments like, oh my gosh, did we just make a horrible mistake? But the thing I always try and let people know is that on a first round, the goal is to show you, well, here's a whole bunch of things that people liked. Here's some of this and some of that and some of something else. What of what we're showing you is too conservative, is too far, is totally off the mark. And if it is, that's okay. We've all learned something. So we all breathe and then we go back and research again and take another stab at it. And we didn't have a whole lot of time. Over some pretty quick iterations, we got narrower, narrower, narrower until we got to a point where we had something that felt like pretty good. And when we were closer, we started bringing the kids back in. One of the things when you have young people and adults, we always had to make these decisions of where do we respect the process and make sure that the kids have a say in things, and where is having, what did you have, 40 kids on, there's 60 kids on this team, we're having like a million voices on every single round saying, I like it blue, I like it yellow, I want it green. Where does that just keep bifurcating things? So we ended up narrowing down and presenting on round 2, presenting to just a tight group of staff. And when the staff had narrowed it down, then we brought in a group of, I think we had like 6 of the students and a few of the other stakeholders. And then we tightened it up and then we expanded it back out. So to go through and have the staff just pick an icon would not have been good for the community, and it would not have been authentic to the process, but it eventually got us there. And so we'll show you. So let me get the, I'm always clicking the wrong button. So I got to show the screen first. So let me show you all. This is where we ended up. And any of you, I know there's a lot of you here today that have been on a number of our different sessions around design and branding. So you've probably seen this logo before. And one of the important, interesting things that I always have to communicate with you is that when you're talking about a logo, you don't just mean a logo. I don't know if you ever noticed, Krista, but I think Megan checked, and I think we sent you 175 files. And we were like, oh
no, I believe it.
You believe it, right? Because, in this case, there's so many use cases. So one of the cool things that we ended up having the students do, because we had to narrow down and pick a small subsection of the committee to work on the the actual brand identity, the logo, the crafting of this icon, Krista was like, well, we can't just like, is there anything else we can give the other kids to do? So we sent the other group of the kids off to do a visual survey of where is the logo now? You know, it's sort of like a where's Waldo of the current logo. And they went out and took pictures and gathered all of the use cases. And it was tremendously helpful as we were like, oh, okay, so if we do a dark blue icon with a dark blue outline, and this ever has to go onto a dark blue uniform, how are we going to deal with that? So we ended up creating a version of it where there's a white outline around the actual logo graphic. You can't see it on a white background, but we knew it needed to be there because there were going to be uses that we knew were going to come up that you don't always think about. So it's so important when you think about whatever you're creating to think about, you know, is it more often going to be in a horizontal space? Is it going to be in a vertical space? And if it's going to be one of those two extremes, like Unionville Longhorns, they're both really long words. And there was nothing we could do about the fact that Unionville was a long word. And then they picked Longhorn, also a long word. How do we create an image that, if it needs to be a square or a circle for a social media avatar, was going to work? So it's so important in this creative brief process to ask things like, well, what does modern mean to you? What colors are important to you? How do you anticipate using this? Where do you see it going in the future? So that any designer that you work with really gets an understanding both about the style that you're looking for, but also the functionality. And this is something that gets lost so often. And you end up stuck with a logo that you have to end up adapting like right away in order to get it to do the things that you want it to do. Some of the other things that we realized is that, you know, we needed both a strong, iconic look for sports, but that they also wanted to use the same iconography in business communications. So if you can see on the bottom right, we came up with a kind of simplified, cleaner, we call this the business version of the Longhorn character. And then, I mean, you do something like this, and then the coolest thing about it is you really get to see it brought to life. And so Krista has shared some of the ways that they've actually physically implemented it. And, you know, another thing that you have to think about when you're changing anything, whether it's a color or a font or a logo, you know, what has to be updated? We always have people do a communication audit before we go into a logo design. And Krista had already done a lot of this work. But in a school's case, you know, you got to repaint a basketball floor. That is no small investment. It's no small project. And there's timing associated with it. You know, there's signage and shirts and banners and just countless things. And so thinking about, what does a transition look like to you? You know, do you take it in chunks? Like what needs to be ready for you to do your reveal? So Krista, how did you guys go about making the decision about what you were going to change first and when and how to really get people to embrace it, but without exhausting you with all the gazillion things that need to be changed or completely destroying your budget?
Yeah, so this was not something we budgeted for. Again, the summer of 2022 really, and some call to action from alumni and students really, told us to take a look at it, and that's, when this process started. But there wasn't any funds earmarked for this process. But so really, we had to take a look at our long range facilities plans and see, okay, well, what is scheduled to be changed? What is, or some of the things like, what can we replace minimal with for a minimal cost, so things like tablecloths and the, flags outside of our school. But obviously the gym floor was something that was slated to get redone last year. So it worked in our favor that the timing had worked. I will tell you that our turf field was just redone 3 years ago. And currently there's a U with a feather on there. And, I cannot say that we would be good stewards of our taxpayers' dollars if we just changed that. It would be a significant cost to swap out that logo. but the brand ambassador in me thinks it should be done right away.
Right.
So
And you're so right. It's like, it's always such a hard call.
yeah.
What did you end up doing with the website?
Yeah, so the website, we switched out all of our branding on the website to the new branding. We got as much spiritware out there for our students. The important thing was to get the buy-in. So after the launch, we met with our boosters, our parents, and the key was too to have spiritware immediately available, which we did launch the store as soon as the board voted on the change. So you really had to continue the momentum. This is very key because making sure that spiritware store was open that evening and getting our buy-in from our students to have their sports teams, the next time they were going to get some spiritware ordered, it was going to be Longhorn themed. And so we really saw this transition from a point of no identity and no, I wouldn't say no school spirit. The students were very spirited, but they didn't have anything they could rally behind. So you saw this movement, this incredible movement of getting behind this new identity and letting them be able to be creative. In the top left picture there, I just love this so much. That is, they meet off in the distance of our stadium, and they actually meet as a group. The student section meets as a group, and then they stampede to their student section, which they then have branded themselves the Herd. And the school stadium is they refer to it as the Ranch, and the gymnasium is now the Barn. So they're having a lot of fun being creative, and I think that's what they were missing and what they needed, and having that ability to be creative and be spirited around this has really brought this energy to the school. That's just been amazing to watch. So
The Longhorns on the tuba is probably my favorite. That's
yeah,
awesome.
and
So I
our,
wanna just take a moment
football
to
booster
pause.
moms have these headbands that have
That-
Longhorns too. It's
Oh my
pretty
gosh,
cool.
that's
Yeah.
brilliant. So I just want to make sure that I'm pausing here and taking a moment to see, does anybody have any questions, anything that you want to pop into the chat or into the Q&A? I want to make sure that we're saving time to answer any particular questions that anyone's having around, this experience, this transition, any of this. And as I'm looking, to see, I'll keep an eye on that to see if any questions pop in. I'd love to know from you, Krista, what are the lessons that you've learned from this process? So what tips or advice could you give somebody, even if they weren't a school, if they were going through, if someone's on here today and they're at the beginning of the process to say, wow, is all of this worth it? Should we take on the time, the investment, the expense, the headache of going through this? What's your advice to people?
Yes, I mean, I have a few reflections from this process, and one being that the importance of listening and learning to foster change is incredible, right? So as I shared, there, in the process, we did a lot of listening and learning. We did a lot of listening and learning before we made the decision to retire a mascot, and then we did a lot of listening and learning, when we were trying to narrow down our options. So, nothing should be done in haste. Take the time to listen to your community and learn about the different things that might be a good fit. Engaging the community in a transparent process is key. So, something I didn't talk too much about was that throughout this whole process, we were completely transparent. It was covered in the process was covered in our, in the local news. We had a website that had every step of the process, our timeline, everything we were doing was shared on social media. So that transparency allowed us and the community to feel like we weren't hiding anything through this process. We were letting you know every step of the way what we were thinking. So I think that was really important. Building consensus through committee work is really interesting and really important, to believe in your committee, to believe in each step of the process, and to honor that work to moving forward and to feel good about it.
And
to
what a
own
life
it.
skill those kids got, you know?
Yes, and
I
yes.
mean, I always joke that my kids, when they were going through school, that if they learned project management and meeting a deadline, and they learned to stand up in front of a group of people and explain, like to be able to talk about something that they did, if they graduated high school with those two skills, like they're going to be fine for life. But like, I mean, when you look at what they went through, is like how to advocate for something you believe in, how to build consensus, and also how to, you know, accept when the thing that the horse that you're pulling for doesn't win, quite literally.
Yeah, and I
It's
would
so
say,
beneficial to kids.
yeah, and I would say like the last reflection would be like introducing change after, 50 plus years in our case, 50 years of tradition takes courage. This
Mhm.
was, this was a brave, journey. And I tell other districts that I speak with who are going through this, I was like, this is not easy. This takes a lot of courage. But if you handle the process with care and thoughtfulness, in every step along the way, and you're transparent and you include the right folks, this brave process, can work out well. So, you know,
And I have to say, as a bunch of creative people that were part of helping you bring this to life, the Friday night in the fall, when you texted me a picture of the costume from the field, pretty much, you know, my team was like, we felt like we just had a baby.
well,
One of the
that baby
as-
just celebrated his first birthday, and that's Lenny.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when you told me about this idea, so first of all, you came up with a name for it. So the character that was actually constructed has a name and a costume and an identity. But what I love especially about this is, like what you said in the beginning, is that a lot of the people that were part of crafting this idea and making this transition were maybe juniors and seniors that are going to be rolling off and like moving into their futures. The idea of having a birthday party for this identity, for this character, to me is a way to help the new people coming into the community to make this thing that they may not have been part of creating their own. And that's so critical, that you didn't just like put a check mark on it. You know, what we talk about all the time when it comes to brand focus is you got to know your audience, you got to figure out your message, you've got to then create this image or identity. But ultimately, brand lives in the experience. And the fact that you are taking that forward and knowing that experiences have to be generated and then regenerated every single day is really going to help embed this to the point where it starts, you know, percolating out and doing things on its own. Some of those things you may love, some maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about keeping the momentum going, and that was really key. We launched the mascot in January, and then what? In the couple of the pictures, you'll see, if you go to one of the pictures, it's so cute. I think it's picture number 8. There's a picture of students in the bottom right. They didn't have any team Longhorn gear, but they were so excited to be the Longhorns that they created their own, So finding that, they were so excited because of the process that we went through, and they were really, we wanted to give them something as when the next school year started that really kind of symbolized, hey, this is us, we're the Longhorns. And that's what Lenny gave them. And I it was like the way the students have reacted this year, it's just been incredible. Like I said, the herd, I mean, you can see it in their faces, the tubas, they've done that all on their own. There's a lot of passion behind our new mascot, which is awesome. And it's great to see, our elementary kids wearing the Longhorn gear, and so it's really become widely accepted in the community. And I couldn't be more happy with how where we are now. And so Lenny's birthday, and the students voted on the name. Actually, it was between Lenny and Lucky. So again,
really?
keeping the students engaged in the process gives them that more of that reason to have that buy-in and be excited about something. So again, that was probably a key learning as well.
Fabulous. Well, Krista, thank you so much for sharing, everything that you went through, all the background scene stuff that you did to bring this to life. I can tell you, we were thrilled to be part of it. And it's so exciting to see what you've done and how you are, bringing it into your community, embracing it and living it. I hope it was helpful for everyone that was here today. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that this was valuable. Please feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions or anything that we can support you with. We're grateful to have you all join us today, and keep an eye out for our emails to keep an eye on what is coming up next in our classes and conversational programming. Thank you so much. And thank you, Krista, for joining me today. Everyone have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.
Thank you.